I'm talking with Tom Isaac of Citi, and the question that I've got for Tom is, when we talk of network managers, we almost talk about a generic species, yet there are different areas of network management, and I wonder if you could differentiate between the network managers of the prime brokers in the brokerage community and the network managers who work for global custodians. How do the services and how does the offering differ?
Well, I'll start with the broker-dealer, the investment bank, the prime broker. I think they are now looking at a much broader set of issues. They are starting actually with the exchanges, looking at the central counterparties and the infrastructures. And their remit is not only looking at best service, information for their clients in terms of market information, corporate events, particularly for the prime brokerage clients, but they're also looking at the liquidity requirements and how the balance sheet of the broker is being used throughout the day. And that is quite distinct from the global custodian, where the network manager is really looking to form a view of how he can service his client the best, how he can provide information, and how he can ensure protection of the assets. So a slightly different focus. I think there's a third there that you haven't mentioned, which are the private banks. I think the private banks then have a distinct view of individual taxation is absolutely critical, and so those I put them in a third category. So that would be the third one I'd also mention.
Okay, I mean, given that there is a service differential between the three categories, how do you differentiate on pricing?
I don't. Well, each organisation can have all three, or can be just a prime broker, an investment bank, or a private bank. And I think you have to be unique. So you have to look at the overall client. If they're buying for all three different network teams, you've got to price in a bundled way. But if you're doing it individually, obviously transactional volume is the investment bank's key driver, so focus around how you can minimize transactional costs. Well, the private bank and the global custodian are both much more focused on asset servicing and the basis point charges around custody. So that's the differentiation in price.
You mentioned in your comments earlier, and you mentioned also in the conference earlier today, the question of liquidity and charging for liquidity, and you brought up the fact that Crest has a practice of requiring liquidity, and that is charged for. What do you think is going to happen in the future insofar as liquidity provision from custodian banks?
I think it will become a commodity and it will be charged for, and I think the regulators will expect it to be. I am expecting, as the investment banks look for a certainty about liquidity provision intraday, that they will be prepared to charge for it. I think the global custodians don't use as much liquidity, and therefore they will continue to see it as part of a bundled cost. But I think there will be an ability to charge and a market that will accept that charge because of the strategic and systemic importance of intraday liquidity for the brokers.
I know there's a lot of auto-collateralization in the market which helps in the generation of liquidity, but do you see liquidity as something which is fundamentally in short supply, or do you think there is adequate capacity in the market with efficient collateral management policies?
I think at the moment, with efficient collateral policies, there is sufficient liquidity. The concern I have is as the derivatives markets move towards central counterparties, and that the bilateral ISDA credit support annexes are turned into a standard market practice, will that provision of collateral be sucked dry and therefore the liquidity being reduced? That's one issue. The other issue I still think we have got some work to do on is actually the end investor does not always through the process release the asset for collateralization, and if you go through an ICSD, the ICSD will say they're client assets, and because their treasury may have received money in and may not have passed on to sub-custodians or through its processes, that auto-collateralization is not as sufficient as it should be. So I think the two things that worry me are derivatives going on a CCP using more collateral, and our inability to get really efficient use of end investor assets through the settlement chain while protecting the end investor.
Tom Isaac, thank you very much indeed.